Howdy. So if you're using Twitter's Bootstrap for your framework here on a project, you may have ran into a little bit of trouble when trying to get drop-down menus to work with dynamic menus inside of the system. Today I'm going to show you how to work around that with a little bit of JavaScript and just adding a class here and there to the dynamic menu item. If you haven't already, you can watch my integration series that I have available here on my website where I integrate this Twitter Bootstrap theme into Business Catalyst from start to finish. Just visit my home page and you'll get a link straight to that particular feature. But let's figure out how we get this drop down here to work inside of our dynamic menu in Business Catalyst. I'm going to add one here because this is a Bootstrap template. Let's go add one. Now, if I look at the markup, this is an example of some Twitter Bootstrap navigation markup just out of the box. And we see here that we have a class added to the parent UL. I've already got this set up here in my dynamic menu, and I'll show you how I did that in a second. But if we continue down, we just have an unordered list, and then we get down to our drop down list item here, and we see that things begin to start to kind of happen. I'm going to add a class to our dynamic menu item of drop down, but then in here this stuff is pretty much next to impossible to pull off with a dynamic menu without getting kind of crazy, especially adding a class to the child UL element here. So I'm going to use JavaScript jQuery to pull this off here. So the first place I need to start is I need to add a drop-down menu item to the main navigation. And remember, inside of my main navigation, underneath module templates and menu, we have one called main nav. And let's look at each one of these pages here. This is how I'm controlling the nav currently. You'll see that the parent nav item, I have added a class of nav. This is going to be my target in jQuery, and I've also added this pull right. So these are just basic Twitter Bootstrap moves that will make this a main nav, and it'll pull it off to the right. So that's how I've added those key classes to the parent up here. In this case, it's nav pills, but we don't need that in this particular nav because they're not pills, it's just a regular nav. But I wanted to show you that's how I got those parent nav classes to the UL here. So I'll close those out. The container doesn't have any classes or anything like that, and this is just the standard BC list item module layout here, so we don't need to look at that. But I did want to expose that to you so you weren't confused. I really just want to go into the back end of my site and add a drop down menu out to the end here. Let's do it. So I'm going to call this drop down item. So I'll just keep it one word here, drop down item. It's not going to have a link, but what we do want to do is we want to be consistent with our code here, and here's where we're focusing. We want to add a class to the parent item. Well, I can do that in dynamic menus by traveling to the dynamic menu item itself and then clicking on item CSS class name. So I hit save. So I've added that drop down menu item and I've ensured that it has a class assigned to it here. Well, let's go out and refresh. I have a feeling that this is just going to add another item to the nav here. That really doesn't help us out much. We need to add child nav items to that. So back to the dynamic menu, I'll click add item, and I'll add a few of these to this parent, to this drop down item there, and I'll choose its parent and then hit save. So let's add a couple of these. I need to make sure that belongs to that parent. I'll add another item. I'll choose drop down item as its parent, and one more for good measure here. Now I'll come out and refresh, and what we have here is a little bit of a mess. let's inspect this item, figure out what's going on. Here's the class of dropdown that we added to the parent item. That's great, that's what we want. But then we see here, because I'm inside of this main nav, remember that module layout that I showed you for that menu, that we had those classes hard coded to this list item, to this unordered list tag? Well, ideally that wouldn't be there, so we're going to kill that with JavaScript. And then down below here, this is still blown up because this is just a list item inside of a unordered UL tag there. So we see that here we need to start adding classes to our main drop-down item. We also have a data attribute here of toggle, so we're going to have to add this with JavaScript. And then this guy here, we got this caret, which is going to show the little down symbol that says, hey, I've got children, click on me so you can show these. And then look, we've got to somehow add this class to the child UL element here. So that's our task with JavaScript. The rest we can't really control anything outside of just adding this main class to the parent list item in the dynamic menu builder there. So we'll just get creative with jQuery to do that. I think what I also want to do is ensure that when I refresh here, because we're using jQuery to do this, we don't want this to show up, let jQuery work its magic and to snap this into place, because there would be a brief second where this would just be broken. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add CSS to I'm going to add a class here to our CSS that says any list items that are inside of this nav that have the class of dropdown, we're just seriously going to hide those. And then when we're done with our JavaScript black magic, let's show those items. Okay, so that's the first place I'm going to start. I'm going to go back to my little example code here, which I'll explain this jQuery here in a second, and I'm going to grab one line of CSS. Okay, and then in my editor, I'm going to travel to my CSS. I'm just going to attach this to the theme CSS for now, just so I'm sure it gets loaded, and I'll publish that. So now I'm going to make sure that we give this a good refresh. Okay, there we go. So it was stalled out there on the upload. So I'll go to inspect this element here, and we're going to see that the drop-down item that I added out on the end here is just hidden with CSS. So we're going to now throw some JavaScript at it here. And so let's look at this jQuery that we'll be adding. We can clear this out. Now, the only thing that you may need to change is this here if you got creative with your naming. But if you're using the Twitter Bootstrap framework, you may not have to change any of this, and you can just plug this into your site's JavaScript. So I'm going to grab this entire chunk of code, and I'm going to open up my inspector, and I'm going to choose the console here. And I'm just going to paste this in, and we'll see that made our drop-down menu item show up, and it works. So let's review this jQuery here and figure out what the heck is going on. So we have our nav container. Remember, this is the class that we assigned to the UL, to the parent UL. And then we're saying, let's assign this variable to all the drop-downs that have a class assigned associated with them of drop-down. Okay? And then we're going to iterate through all of those items. Okay? And we're just going to target the first anchor. And that's this guy here. So that's the first anchor. And we're going to do a few things to that. We're going to add a class of dropdown-toggle. There's that. And then we're going to add an attribute of data-toggle and give it a value of dropdown. That's this here. Okay. And then after the actual text for that, we're going to append this bit of HTML, which is a bold tag, and given a class of caret right here. So we've manipulated this first anchor here, and now below that we're going to drop down to the child UL. we're going to make sure that we strip all the classes, because remember our menu module template was adding some classes to it, so we'll strip those, and then we're going to add that class of dropdown-menu. That's this here. So again, if you're using the just standard Twitter Bootstrap nav setup, this should just work. And here we are showing that after we work all that magic, because remember we added some CSS to say that these guys should be hidden, and then when we're done with all this, let's use jQuery to show them. So I'll come out and refresh, and I'll add, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this actual JavaScript to my site's JavaScript. So I'm going to go to my editor. Okay, I'm going to go to JS. I'm going to go to my customs JS file. You just throw this where you need to in your case, and in this I've got my own custom scripts isolated into this file. I'm going to make a function here. I'm going to call it dropdown nav tweak. Okay, so I'll throw this in there. Make sure I format it so I can read it. Great. So I'll add this down here to initialize it. Again, you can throw this JavaScript right here, this whole chunk, into the head of your document or into the foot of it, as long as you're calling jQuery. Just make sure you're calling jQuery, and you should be off to the races. So I'll publish this. Now I'll come out and refresh a couple times. And there's our drop-down menu. So we'll come in the About Us. So there's a little stall there while that magic happens, but it's not as gruesome as it would be if you just left it out in the open to work its magic. So that's a brief tutorial on how you can add drop-down menus to a Twitter Bootstrap theme in Business Catalyst.